Today, I want to dive into this question: are land contracts safe? Are land contracts safe? Talk about a loaded question. But stick with me, because by the end of this video, you're going to have a clear understanding of the ins and outs of land contracts. You will know how to leverage them for your advantage while minimizing the risks that come associated with land contracts. And understanding these can really up your game when it comes to real estate advantage, helping you maximize your profits and minimizing your risk. Did you realize that land contracts can offer incredible flexibility for both the buyer and the seller? But they do come with some hidden pitfalls that, if not understood, could cost you thousands of dollars. Are land contracts an untapped goldmine for real estate investing, or a legal minefield waiting to explode? Well, let's dive in by first explaining what land contracts are. Next, I'm going to explain how they benefit both the buyer and the seller. And finally, what you need to know to understand how to utilize land contracts to make them safe for you. If you're ready, let's go. A land contract is a legal agreement for a seller-financed purchase, and it doesn't involve a bank or a mortgage lender. Instead, the buyer and seller negotiate, and the buyer makes periodic payments to the seller, and the seller actually retains the deed of the property until that land contract is paid in full. A land contract is sometimes called a bond for title or contract for deed. So when is a land contract typically used? A land contract many times is used when the buyer maybe has a challenging situation where they're not able to get a traditional mortgage. Maybe they've got poor credit. Maybe they don't have a credit history that allows them to get a loan. Maybe they've been in a situation before they've gone through a short sale, or they've been in a foreclosure on a piece of property. But the land contract will give that buyer the opportunity to actually own a home or equitable title to that home without going through a bank. Another reason is if the buyer doesn't have enough money for a down payment or closing costs, this could be another great option, because the land contract, you can actually get into it with no money down, just start making periodic payments. And probably the most common real estate strategy where land contracts are utilized is something called a slow flip. It's a great strategy that allows you to buy a property now and be able to sell it down the road utilizing a land contract, but being able to finance it and pay it off in 5, 6, or 7 years, but have that money coming in as if you'd done a 30-year mortgage on a seller finance. And slow flips are an amazing strategy, and I have some videos on my page. Go check them out, where I go into great detail about how to utilize this awesome strategy with land contracts. So let's talk about pros and cons for both the buyer and the seller when it comes to land contracts. Well, the buyer, as I mentioned, you can get into a property with little to no money down, poor credit, bad credit, or no credit history. I mean, I'm self-employed, and so I found it very difficult sometimes for me to get a loan, even though I can show income, because the challenge as a business owner, you want to show as little income as possible. But when you're going out to get a loan and you show as little income as possible, the bank's saying, this person doesn't have much income, I can't loan to him. So a land contract bypasses all of that. Plus, the buyer has equitable title. They own the home essentially. They don't have the deed quite yet till it's paid off, but they enjoy having a home that they live in. Now let's talk about the negatives or the cons when it comes to a land contract for buyer. Well, first off, you're not building up equity in that property, right? You're just making payments on the land contract. You're most likely not going to improve your credit, because the seller's not going to be reporting your payments to the crediting agency, so you're not going to be able to build up your credit by paying down this land contract. And probably the biggest negative for a buyer, if you default on payments, or you can't make the balloon payment or final payment on your property when the contract says you need to, because of that, the seller can say that you've broken the contract, and the seller keeps every single payment you made up to that point, and they're able to retain the entire home and evict you from the property. That is probably the biggest negative, which brings me into some of the pros for the seller. A land contract absolutely benefits the seller in these scenarios. Now, one of the biggest pros is obviously the seller can act as a landlord. Doesn't have the landlord responsibilities. The buyer's responsible for maintenance, taxes, and insurance and repairs. And so the seller doesn't have the landlord responsibilities. But if that contract is broken by the buyer, the seller can evict that individual as if they were a landlord and they were a tenant, and retain all of that money. Another benefit for the seller is because they're not utilizing a bank, and because you're bringing in a potential buyer that maybe has more challenging credit history, you can charge more on interest rates than a typical bank would. Another benefit is it takes a lot shorter time to finalize a land contract than a traditional mortgage getting done. And another benefit, if the seller already has a mortgage on the property, it doesn't have to pay off the mortgage to do a land contract. You would do what's called a wraparound mortgage. So as the seller, you would receive the payment from the buyer, and you would take that money and you would wrap around and pay the mortgage that you have on the property and pocket the rest. So what are the negatives to the seller when it comes to a land contract? Well, number one, the seller doesn't receive the full purchase price of the property up front. They might not receive any money up front, only start receiving monthly payments from the buyer. Another negative is the seller could be potentially selling to a buyer that might be a challenging tenant because they don't have the credit history to buy it, and that could cause undue concerns and take up a lot of your time. So let's finally dive into, are land contracts safe? So land contracts absolutely are a safe investment tool. They've been used for a long time, but here is what I always say. Each state, each county, each municipality differs a little bit, so I would highly recommend hiring a real estate attorney to be able to help walk you through the land contract specific for your state. And I always give that advice because I would do the exact same thing. I understand a lot about land contracts, but there's nuances that sometimes don't make sense to me, or that might be different because the state has certain statutes or regulations surrounding land contracts. But if you're utilizing land contract, like I said, it benefits the seller first and foremost. It is a great tool for a seller finance to utilize a land contract. And as a buyer, it can absolutely be safe and a great tool. But once again, I would make sure that everything is detailed out and it has been looked over by an attorney, because you want to make sure that you know the purchase price, the monthly payments, the cadence, and you also want to know what are the challenges. Is there a late payment period where I can make up a late payment? What if I miss a payment? Is there an opportunity to make that up down the road without receiving the ultimate worst situation where you're evicted and all your money is taken that you've put into the property? So once again, making sure that everything is detailed out in a land contract is absolutely crucial for you as a buyer, and as a seller, making sure that you've read through the contract with a fine-tooth comb or have a real estate attorney look it over for you. Now, land contracts are an awesome tool to do real estate investing, especially with slow flips, but there's a strategy that I've come up with where I've actually kind of slow flips on top of their head, and I'm actually making really good money, cash flow every single month that anybody can do in any market with little to no money out of your pocket. And it is an absolute game changer that could help you create massive wealth in real estate right now. It's called cash flow flipping. And if you click on this video right here, I go into full detail about how I came up with this strategy, how it works, and how you can utilize it to create massive wealth. Thanks for stopping by. Have an amazing day.